Picture this. The Ottoman Empire is dying in real time. It's July 1402 on the dusty plains near Ankara, and the invincible war machine of Sultan Bayezid is coming apart at the seams. Timur's armored elephants are smashing through the center like a battering ram. Panic spreads the way fire spreads, fast, uncontrollable, devouring everything. Thousands of Tatar mercenaries start defecting mid-battle. One moment they're fighting for the Sultan. The next, they're turning their swords on him. Bayezid is surrounded. His bodyguards are dropping one by one, and the route to safety is sealed off by a wall of Mongol spears. And then, on the right flank, something impossible happens. A wedge of 5,000 knights in heavy black plate armor does not retreat. They don't scatter. They don't break. They slam their visors down. They level their lances, and they charge straight into the teeth of Timur's horde. These aren't Ottoman Turks. They're Serbs. And at the front of that charge, hacking open a path through the enemy with suicidal courage, is a desperate man named Stefan Lazarević, a Christian prince fighting to save a Muslim sultan. He's risking his elite guard to rescue the very man who executed his father. From a nearby ridge, Timur watches this black-clad unit shred his light cavalry. This is a conqueror who built pyramids out of human skulls, yet he doesn't order their massacre. He points toward them and tells his generals, "Look, those are not men, they are lions." Stefan cuts a corridor of blood all the way to the Sultan. He yells for Bayezid to flee. He offers his own horse, his own life, to get him out. But Bayezid, frozen by pride, refuses to move. Stefan has done his duty. He wheels his horse around, covers the retreat of the Sultan's eldest son, and somehow fights his way back out of the encirclement. It's one of the greatest feats of martial prowess in the Middle Ages, and it leaves us with a disturbing question. Why? Why would Stefan Lazarević fight like a demon for the monster who orphaned him? Before we dive into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, hit that like button and subscribe for more long-form content like this, and comment below where you're listening from. It still blows my mind that we can explore these ancient stories together from all over the world, connected across time and space by the same curiosity about the past. Because the answer to that question isn't simple loyalty, it's survival. To understand the carnage at Ankara, you have to understand the world Stefan was trapped in, a world where honor could get you killed. By 1402, Stefan Lazarević wasn't just an Ottoman vassal. He was the most valuable weapon in the Ottoman arsenal. The Ottoman cavalry was fast, deadly, and relentless, but it lacked one thing: the crushing, unstoppable power of European heavy armor. Stefan provided that iron fist. Whether Bayezid was fighting crusaders at Nicopolis or Mongols at Ankara, Stefan was the sledgehammer the Sultan used to break his enemies. But the relationship was twisted. Think about the psychological trap he lived in. Every victory Stefan won for Bayezid tightened the chains around Serbia's neck. If Stefan fought poorly, the Ottomans would punish Serbia, burn towns, take hostages, crush the country outright. But if he fought brilliantly, the Ottoman Empire grew stronger, and Serbian independence became even more impossible. He was walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. At Ankara, the tightrope finally snapped, because the Battle of Ankara wasn't just a defeat, it was a geopolitical earthquake. The Sultan was captured, destined to die in captivity. Some accounts claim he was kept in a gilded cage, reduced to a trophy at Timur's feet. Whether the details are literal or not, the reality is clear. The invincible shadow that had loomed over Stefan's entire life evaporated in a single day. So as Stefan rode away from the burning battlefield, bloodied, exhausted, barely holding his battered army together, the dynamic shifted instantly. He was no longer the Sultan's attack dog. He was a free agent in a shattered world, and he possessed something no one else in the region had anymore: an intact army. The lion Timur admired was now loose. But to understand how Stefan became the kind of warrior who could command respect from the most brutal conqueror on earth, we have to look at how he was forged. He wasn't born this way. He was forced into it by catastrophe. So we need to rewind the clock 13 years to a different battlefield, where the grass was stained red and the Serbian nobility was wiped out in a single afternoon. We need to go back to Kosovo. The news arrived in the capital, Kruševac, not with screams, almost worse than that, with silence. Prince Lazar was dead. The cream of Serbian nobility, the flower of the aristocracy, lay rotting on the field of blackbirds. Kosovo didn't just kill a king, it decapitated the state. In one afternoon, Serbia went from a regional power to a headless corpse waiting to be carved up by vultures. And at the center of that collapse stood a 12-year-old boy, Stefan Lazarević. He was too young to properly hold a sword, and yet the weight of a crown was suddenly pressing down on his brow. But the real hero of this moment wasn't Stefan. It was his mother, Princess Milica. History loves to push widows into the background, turning them into symbols of mourning. Milica wasn't a symbol. She was steel. She swallowed her grief because she could see the sharks circling, and the threat wasn't only from the south. Yes, the Ottomans were regrouping after Kosovo, having lost their own Sultan, Murad. But the Kingdom of Hungary saw an opening too. King Sigismund, a man who will become central to Stefan's fate, invaded from the north hoping to seize Serbian lands while the country was defenseless. Stefan was trapped. Hungarians at the gate, Ottomans at the door. And inside the house, rivals were sharpening knives, dreaming of ripping the Lazarevic dynasty apart. Milica made a calculation that would haunt her family forever. Fighting two empires at once was suicide, so she had to choose a master. Hungary offered conquest, nothing more. The Ottomans, now ruled by Sultan Bayezid the Thunderbolt, offered protection, but at a horrific price. The price was twofold. First, Stefan, the new prince, would become a vassal, tribute, obedience, and when he came of age, he would ride to war at the Sultan's command. Second, and far more personal, Bayezid demanded Stefan's beloved sister, Olivera, for his harem. Imagine the courtyard of Kruševac in 1390. This wasn't a wedding. It was a living funeral. Citizens lined the streets throwing flowers, not in celebration, but in mourning. Young Stefan, barely a teenager, stood at the gates and watched the Ottoman convoy take his sister away. Olivera wasn't screaming. By all accounts, she went with a dignified, stone-faced silence, understanding that her body was the ransom paid for her country's survival. She became a human shield, one that slowed the Ottoman advance. For Stefan, that moment was the forge. He learned his first lesson in realpolitik. Dignity is a luxury. Survival is a duty. He saw that moral purity can lead straight to the grave, while compromise, brutal, humiliating compromise, could keep your people alive. Months later, Stefan had to take his own walk into humiliation. He traveled to the Ottoman capital to bend the knee to Bayezid. And what happened next is one of the most psychologically complex scenes in medieval history. Stefan was brought before the man who had ordered his father's execution. He expected mockery, prison, death, the final erasure of the Lazarevic line. Instead, Bayezid surprised him. The Sultan, famous for his explosive temper, looked at the boy and saw potential. Maybe he saw the fire of Lazar's bloodline. Maybe he saw a weapon that could be shaped. Bayezid didn't treat Stefan like a prisoner. He treated him like family, almost like a younger brother, even a son. He warned Stefan about the duplicity of King Sigismund. He promised to protect Serbia's borders, so long as Stefan remained loyal. It was the devil's bargain, because Bayezid offered Stefan the father figure he had just destroyed. And that's the genius of it. By treating Stefan with respect, Bayezid scrambled the boy's hatred. He bound him not only with chains, but with gratitude. Stefan returned to Serbia changed. He wasn't just the orphan of Kosovo anymore. He was the Sultan's protege. He began governing with a maturity far beyond his years. With Milica beside him, they stabilized what was left of the economy. They rebuilt the army. They tried to hold the state together with shaking hands. But looming over every decision was the shadow of the East. Stefan knew the call would come. Soon Bayezid would march to war, and Stefan would have to ride with him. He would have to draw his sword against fellow Christians, maybe even against Hungary, against the very king threatening his northern border. The boy was gone. The vassal was born, and his first test was closer than anyone wanted to admit. The call didn't take long. The Ottoman war machine was turning its gaze toward a grand prize, and they needed their Serbian brothers to bleed for it. For the next 5 years, Stefan Lazarević lived a life split clean down the middle. In Serbia, he was the prince, trying to rebuild a shattered state, trying to keep farms running and towns standing, trying to look like a ruler when he still felt like a hostage. But for long stretches of time, he wasn't in Serbia at all. He was at the court of Sultan Bayezid the Thunderbolt, sometimes a guest, sometimes a high-status prisoner, always watched. And this period matters because it forged the weapon that would later shock Europe. Stefan was growing up. The boy was becoming a giant. Chroniclers describe him as exceptionally tall and physically imposing, earning him the nickname Stefan the Tall. But his physical growth was matched by something even more dangerous: a ruthless education in power. He sat at the feet of the man who killed his father and learned how empires actually function. Bayezid was a force of nature, charismatic, volatile, brilliant, and strangely, he developed a genuine affection for his Serbian vassal. A lot of that softened attitude came from one person, Oliveira. We have to pause and appreciate the extraordinary position Stefan's sister held. The Ottoman harem was a battlefield in silk, a world of intrigue where hundreds of women competed for influence and survival. Oliveira didn't just endure it, she dominated it. She became Bayezid's favorite. Ottoman chroniclers later grumbled that she held too much sway over him. Some even whispered that she introduced him to wine, an open violation of Islamic law that scandalized the pious, but made her even more valuable to a hedonistic court. Oliveira became Stefan's bridge to the Sultan, his eyes and ears, his diplomat in velvet. Because of her, Stefan wasn't treated like a disposable servant. He was treated like family. He trained alongside the Janissaries. He learned Ottoman warfare from the inside, the feigned retreats, the envelopments, the relentless pressure, the psychological terror of the military bands. He absorbed the speed of the East and fused it with the heavy armor of the West. But that proximity to power came with a sick realization. Stefan saw the Ottoman machine up close, its scale, its discipline, its appetite. He realized that the squabbling European kingdoms, with their feudal rivalries and slow-moving armies, had no idea what was coming. He understood that resistance was mathematically impossible without unity, and Europe couldn't unite. So Stefan made a choice. He became the perfect Ottoman vassal. He crushed local rebellions in Serbia that tried to resist Turkish rule. He paid tribute on time. He sent troops whenever Bayezid snapped his fingers. To fiery patriots in his own land, it looked like treason. To Catholic Hungary, he was a schismatic collaborator. But Stefan was playing the long game. He was feeding the wolf so it wouldn't eat the flock. By 1395, the tension in the Balkans was reaching a breaking point. King Sigismund of Hungary finally grasped the truth. The Ottomans weren't a border nuisance. They were an existential threat. Sigismund began pleading with Europe. Letters went out to France, to Burgundy, to England, warnings that Christianity itself was in peril. And Europe answered. A massive crusade formed, the flower of French chivalry, the wealthiest dukes of Burgundy, Knights Hospitaller, a glittering parade of armor and banners marching east, convinced they were about to drive the Turks from Europe and liberate the Balkans. For Stefan, this should have felt like salvation, but the reality was uglier. As Bayezid's vassal, Stefan was obligated to fight against the Crusaders. If he defected and the Christians lost, Serbia would be annihilated. If he stayed with Bayezid, he would brand himself a traitor to his faith. So he waited. He watched, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The Crusaders were arrogant. They marched with wine and mistresses. They bragged that if the sky fell, they'd hold it up with their lances, and they didn't view the Serbs as brothers to be freed. They saw them as heretics to be dominated, right alongside the Turks. Stefan compared their swagger and disorder to the razor-sharp discipline of the Ottoman camp. In 1396, the two forces collided at the fortress of Nicopolis on the Danube. Bayezid summoned his vassals. Stefan received the call. He donned his armor, gathered his heavy cavalry, and rode south. He wasn't riding to save Christianity. He was riding to destroy it. September 25th, 1396. Nicopolis. This is one of those hinge moments where history holds its breath. The crusade arrived like a moving jewel box. European nobility glittering in steel, convinced they were unstoppable. The French knights, led by the Count of Nevers, looked at the Ottoman army and laughed. They saw light cavalry and irregular infantry and assumed it was a rabble. King Sigismund, who actually understood the Ottomans, begged them to be cautious. He urged them to let Hungarian infantry absorb the first wave of arrows and probe the enemy line. The French refused. They considered it an insult to their honor to let peasants fight first. So they charged. It was magnificent, and it was stupid. French heavy cavalry thundered uphill, smashing through Ottoman irregulars. The knights believed they were winning. They crested the hill expecting to see a fleeing sultan. Instead, they found sharpened stakes, and the silent, disciplined ranks of the Janissaries waiting like a trap springing shut. Horses were impaled. Knights were dragged down into the mud and butchered inside their steel, like cattle in armored cans. But the battle wasn't over. Sigismund, watching this disaster unfold, launched the main Hungarian force to salvage the day. And for a moment, he was winning. Hungarian troops fought with desperation. This was their border, their survival. They pushed the Ottoman center back. Bayezid watched his line buckle. The Sultan was minutes from defeat. This is the moment that could have rewritten everything. If Bayezid fell at Nicopolis, the Ottoman Empire might collapse. Constantinople might be saved. The map of Europe might shift forever. Bayezid had one card left. Hidden in reserve behind the hills waited Stefan Lazarević. At the Sultan's signal, Stefan unleashed his heavy cavalry. 5,000 Serbian knights erupted from the tree line, and they weren't charging the Turks. They were charging the flank of the Christian army. Imagine the view from Sigismund's helmet. His exhausted troops are pushing forward, believing they've turned the tide. Then suddenly, a fresh wall of armored riders comes crashing down on them, and on their shields, the crest of the Lazarevic dynasty, the double-headed eagle. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. Stefan's wedge slammed into the Hungarian flank with the force of a collapsing fortress. The royal standard toppled. Sigismund, realizing the nightmare unfolding, fled, scrambling toward a boat on the Danube just to escape with his life. Nicopolis was over, the crusade was decapitated, and the aftermath was worse. Bayezid, enraged by the losses his army suffered, ordered the execution of thousands of Christian prisoners. They were dragged forward in bound groups, kneeling in dust, waiting to be slaughtered. Stefan had to stand next to his master and watch. As heads of French and Hungarian nobles rolled in the dirt, Stefan remained silent. He intervened only once, begging Bayezid to spare a handful of nobles he recognized, perhaps trying to salvage a shred of conscience from the wreckage. To Europe, Stefan Lazarevic became a monster, the Christian slayer, the man who sold his God to save a tyrant. Monks in Paris and London wrote chronicles cursing his name. But alone in the silence of his tent, Stefan knew the truth. He had saved Serbia. If he had defected to Sigismund, a man who wanted Serbian land as much as the Turks did, and the crusade had still lost, his people would have been exterminated. By saving Bayezid, Stefan secured his position as the Sultan's most trusted ally. He bought his country another generation of existence. But something inside Stefan broke at Nicopolis. Watching the slaughter of men who shared his faith, he realized the Ottoman appetite for war was endless. He had secured survival, but he was trapped in an unending cycle of blood. A hero to the Sultan, a traitor to Christendom, a prisoner of his own success. He needed a way out. But escape seemed impossible. The Ottoman Empire was at its zenith, stretching from the Euphrates to the Danube, held together by Bayezid's terror and Stefan's sword. It seemed like this dark alliance would last forever. But history has a wicked sense of humor. Just as Stefan accepted his fate as the Sultan's eternal soldier, a new storm began gathering in the east. A storm far more terrifying than any crusade. A storm named Timur. And then, Ankara happened. The thunderbolt struck the earth, and the earth swallowed him whole. Following the catastrophe at Ankara, the unthinkable became reality. Bayezid, the terror of Europe, the man who treated kings like servants, was now Timur's prisoner. Legends claim he was kept in an iron cage, forced to watch his wife, our Serbian princess Olivera, serve wine to Mongol conquerors, humiliated beyond imagination. Historians argue over how literal those details are, but the metaphorical truth is undeniable. The Ottoman colossus was shattered. For Stefan Lazarević, the world flipped upside down. As he staggered away from the battlefield, coated in dust and defeat, he understood something profound. The leash was gone. The master who held Stefan's life in his fist was a slave himself. The Ottoman interregnum began. Bayezid's sons tore the empire apart, plunging the region into a decade of civil war. And in that chaos, Stefan saw opportunity. Chaos is a ladder. And Stefan Lazarević was about to climb it. He did not ride straight home to Serbia. He rode to Constantinople. That detour to Constantinople wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. For years, the Byzantines had looked at Stefan Lazarević as a traitor, a puppet of the Turks who helped strangle their dying empire. But politics has the shortest memory of all. With the Ottoman siege finally lifted thanks to Timur's intervention, the Byzantine emperor didn't welcome Stefan as an enemy. He welcomed him like a prodigal son returning to the fold. And inside the sacred halls of Hagia Sophia, something extraordinary happened. The emperor bestowed upon Stefan the title of despot. Now, in modern English, despot sounds like a cruel tyrant, but in the Byzantine hierarchy of the 15th century, it meant the opposite. It was the highest dignity beneath the emperor himself, a title of legitimacy, sovereignty, divine recognition. It told the world Stefan was no longer a vassal warlord or rented sword. He was a ruler, by right. He entered Constantinople as a defeated mercenary. He left as the despot of Serbia. But his ride home wasn't a victory parade. It was a gauntlet. The roads through Thrace were crawling with broken Ottoman units, raiders, bandits, men who smelled weakness in the air and wanted a peace. Stefan fought his way back to his borders, and when he finally returned, he found Serbia terrified and confused. Rumors of Ankara had spread like plague. People feared a Mongol invasion, feared the end of the world. Stefan didn't arrive with panic. He arrived with a vision. He could see the map changing in real time. The Ottomans were paralyzed by civil war. Hungary was wary, but open to negotiation. For the first time since Kosovo, Serbia had room to breathe, so Stefan moved fast. Because breathing room in the Balkans never lasts. He understood that to survive the chaos of the interregnum, he couldn't just be a warrior anymore. He had to become a statesman. And that meant doing something that sounded insane. He turned north, toward King Sigismund of Hungary, the same man he humiliated at Nicopolis. Why would Sigismund ever ally with the man who destroyed his crusade? Because Sigismund was a pragmatist. He knew the Ottomans were down, but not out. He needed a buffer state, a gatekeeper, someone who could hold the line when the Turks returned. And Sigismund knew from painful personal experience that there was no better soldier in the Balkans than Stefan Lazarević. So the Christian slayer and the Crusader king began writing letters. The groundwork formed for one of the most remarkable alliances in medieval history. Stefan wasn't trading the crescent for the cross out of sudden piety. He was doing it with precision, because the next move would elevate him from a Balkan survivor to a European legend. In 1408, in a grand hall in Buda, Sigismund established a new chivalric order, designed to be the elite of the elite, a brotherhood of kings and princes sworn to defend the cross against the enemies of Christ. It was called the Order of the Dragon. Its insignia was terrifying and beautiful, a dragon coiled around its own neck, bearing the red cross of St. George on its back. Later, that symbol would become infamous, thanks to a Wallachian member named Vlad Dracul, and his son, Vlad the Impaler, Dracula, who would stain the dragon with blood. But in 1408, Dracula wasn't even born. What mattered was the charter. At the very top, listed as Item 1, above kings of Aragon and Naples, above magnates of Poland and Italy, was a name that stunned the room. Stefan, despot of Serbia. Let that sink in. 10 years earlier, he was smashing crusaders at Nicopolis. Now he was the first knight of the dragon. Sigismund didn't just forgive him, he exalted him. Because Sigismund recognized a brutal truth. Stefan was the only man in Europe who truly understood how to fight the Ottomans. The dragon wasn't just a symbol, it became Stefan's rank. To cement their alliance, Sigismund gave Stefan a gift, that would reshape Balkan history forever. The city of Belgrade. At the time, Belgrade was a ruined border fortress, neglected, half dead, a ghost town clinging to the river. Stefan saw its potential immediately. Sitting at the confluence of the Danube and Sava rivers, it was the perfect shield for Europe and the perfect heart for Serbia. So he poured everything into it. He unleashed a massive construction project, fueling it with the wealth of his silver mines. Almost overnight, Belgrade rose from the ashes. Stefan built a triple-layer fortress considered impregnable. He dug deep defenses, built strong gates, raised towers that stared down the horizon like clenched fists. He created a deep-water port, turning Belgrade into a trade hub connecting east and west. He built hospitals, a library, a despot's tower, and the city gleamed so brightly with fresh white stone walls that it became the literal White City, Beograd. For a brief, shining moment, Serbia wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Stefan held court in Belgrade like a Western monarch. He hosted jousting tournaments where knights from Germany and Hungary came to test themselves against the tall despot. Chronicles from the era don't describe him as a grim, blood-soaked warlord. They describe him as something rarer, a Renaissance prince before the Renaissance had even arrived. A man with gentle manners and terrifying competence. A ruler who could discuss Plato with scholars in the morning and hunt bears with a spear in the afternoon. He had done the impossible. He walked out of Ottoman fire, shook off the ash, and put on the shining armor of Europe's defender. But history teaches one lesson over and over. When you build a high tower, you cast a long shadow. And in the shadows of Stefan's golden age, resentment was growing. While Stefan played the game of emperors, his own family felt left behind. His younger brother, Vuk Lazarević, watched from the sidelines. Vuk hadn't saved Bayezid. Vuk hadn't been honored in Constantinople. Vuk hadn't been named despot. Vuk was just the brother. And into the ears of a jealous man, Ottoman agents began whispering. They promised him an army. They promised him half the kingdom. They promised him revenge. Stefan had fortified his walls against enemies from without, but he forgot to guard against the enemy within. Civil wars are never really about land. They're about intimacy. They're about the people who know exactly where to stick the knife because they grew up watching you sleep. For Stefan, the next threat didn't come from a stranger in a turban or a knight in foreign steel. It came from the man who shared his mother's womb. Vuk Lazarević became the shadow to Stefan's light. While Stefan built libraries, Vuk brooded among the Ottoman pretenders, bitter, ambitious, and dangerously naive. He looked at Stefan's alliance with Hungary not as genius, but as betrayal. And the Ottomans, masters of divide and conquer, fed him exactly what he wanted to hear. Your brother sold out to the Catholics. You are the true heir. In 1409, the dam broke. Vuk marched into Serbia, not alone, but leading a Turkish army provided by Suleiman, one of the Ottoman princes tearing the empire apart. Belgrade's golden age went under siege, and this war was ugly. Not the heroic charge of Nicopolis, not the desperate stand at Ankara. This was mud and fire, raids, counter-raids, brother against brother, Serbs killing Serbs. Villages that had barely recovered from Kosovo burned again, this time by their own princes. Stefan was forced into a corner. To stop the bleeding, he agreed to a humiliating partition. He split his country in half. The southern regions went to Vuk, but deals with devils always come due. Vuk thought he was using the Ottomans to take the crown. In reality, he was disposable. When the balance of power shifted inside the Ottoman Civil War, a new player rose. Musa Çelebi, And Musa wasn't a diplomat. He was a psychopath, a man who enjoyed cruelty for its own sake. Vuk found himself on the wrong side of that shift. Suddenly, the Ottoman support he depended on became a death sentence. He tried to flee back to Stefan, the brother he betrayed, maybe hoping for mercy. He never made it. Musa's agents caught Vuk in 1410. There was no trial, no dignity. The brother of the despot was executed in a muddy camp, his head severed and tossed into a sack. When the news reached Stefan, it didn't bring relief. It brought solitude. He had won. The rival was gone. The country was reunited under his iron grip. But the Lazarevic family, once a father and two sons, was now reduced to one lonely man on a throne. That tragedy hardened Stefan into something terrifyingly efficient. He understood sentimentality was a weakness he couldn't afford anymore. So he turned grief into law. He turned rage into stone. With Vuk gone and the Ottomans still distracted by their own civil war, Stefan launched a campaign of total consolidation. He crushed the nobles who sided with Vuk. He seized their lands, centralized power in Belgrade. He was done being the benevolent prince. He became the autocrat. And to fuel this new centralized state, Stefan turned to the one resource that never betrayed him: the earth. Because if blood couldn't hold Serbia together, maybe gold could. While Europe fertilized its fields with bodies, Stefan did something revolutionary. He dug. To understand how a small, battered nation like Serbia punched so far above its weight in the early 1400s, you have to follow the money. And in medieval Serbia, the money was silver. Deep in the mountains stood Novo Brdo. Today it's mostly ruins. But under Stefan, it was the Dubai of the Balkans: smoke, fire, industry, coin. It may have produced as much as 20% of Europe's silver. But Stefan didn't just extract wealth, he codified it. In 1412, he issued a mining code known locally as the Zakon o Rudnicima. This wasn't a simple tax law. It was a legal masterpiece, shockingly modern in its thinking. It established rules for ventilation and tunnel support. It outlined worker obligations and, astonishingly, worker rights. It created courts specifically for mining disputes, openly recognizing that the prosperity of the state depended on the safety of the miner. With silver pouring into Belgrade, Stefan built a different kind of fortress, because he understood something deeper. A nation isn't defined only by borders. It's defined by its soul, its language, its books, its faith. If the Ottomans conquered land, they could burn villages. But if they conquered culture, Serbia would vanish. So Stefan built Manasića Monastery, and it doesn't look like a place meant only for prayer. It looks like a bunker. 11 massive towers surround the church, a spiritual vault designed to survive an apocalypse. Inside, Stefan founded the Rasava school, a scriptorium on an industrial scale. He gathered monks, scholars, translators fleeing Ottoman-occupied Bulgaria and Greece. Their mission was to copy, translate, correct, and preserve texts: Aristotle, Plato, the Bible, histories of the world. Stefan wasn't just a patron, he was a participant. Because here's the paradox nobody expects: the Christian slayer was also a poet. He wrote one of the most mysterious and beautiful works in medieval Serbian literature, the Word of Love, or Slovo, a tender lyrical text addressed to a distant, unnamed friend. And for centuries, scholars have argued about who that friend was: God, Oliveira, or Vuk, the brother he had to destroy. The poem aches with longing. It speaks of separation, distance, and the desire to bridge the gap between us who are here and you who are there. It reveals a man unbelievably lonely at the summit of power, surrounded by stone and silver, yet hauntingly isolated. That was Stefan's truth. He wore armor to protect his body, but he used ink to save his people's mind. And the manuscripts produced at Manasija would become a cultural arc, carrying Serbian identity through centuries of Ottoman darkness. Because the darkness was coming back. The Ottoman Civil War was ending. A victor emerged from the fratricidal chaos, Mehmed, and later his son, Murad II. They reorganized, they looked west again, and this time they weren't looking for allies, they were looking for conquest. Stefan, aging now, could feel the tectonic plates shifting, and he had a terrifying problem. He had no son. The dynasty ended with him. The curse of the medieval ruler isn't defeat, it's biology. You can win battles, build fortresses, write poetry that outlives your body, but if you don't have an heir, your legacy becomes a castle built on sand. By the mid-1420s, Stefan was in his 50s, an old man by medieval standards. He had no children. The vultures were already circling. The Ottomans watched his health, expecting Serbia to collapse the moment he died. Hungary checked the fine print of their treaties, ready to reclaim what they could. So Stefan made one final master move. He chose an heir, and his choice shocked everyone. He didn't pick a weak puppet. He didn't pick a distant cousin. He chose Đurađ Branković. To understand how heavy that decision was, you need to understand the blood feud. The Branković family and the Lazarevic family had been rivals for decades. It was a Branković who was accused, though modern historians argue unfairly, of betraying Prince Lazar at Kosovo. For Stefan to name Đurađ as successor was a supreme act of reconciliation. It was an admission that survival mattered more than revenge. Đurađ was capable, wealthy, experienced, and diplomatically sharp. In 1426, at the Assembly of Srebrenica, under the shadow of the silver mines that funded Stefan's reign, he gathered nobles and church leaders. And in a rare moment of unity, Stefan declared Đurađ his son and successor. He forced the nobility to swear allegiance. But the hardest negotiation wasn't with the Serbs, it was with Hungary. Stefan traveled to meet Sigismund at Tata. The Treaty of Tata was signed, a document of survival with a heartbreaking price. Sigismund agreed to recognize Đurađ as the new despot of Serbia. He agreed to continue protection. But in exchange, when Stefan died, the crown jewel of the realm, Belgrade, would be returned to Hungary. Imagine the bitterness in that ink. Stefan had spent 20 years turning Belgrade from ruin into the White City, the cultural heart of the Balkans. He'd poured his soul into its walls. Now he signed it away so the rest of Serbia could live. It was amputation to save the patient. Stefan returned home knowing his time was short. The Ottomans were raiding again. The golden summer was fading into an anxious autumn, but he didn't stop working. He spent his final months strengthening fortresses, including the majestic Golubac on the Danube, racing to finish his defenses before the wolves came. He began his reign as a hostage. He ended it as a statesman, but there was one negotiation he could never win: death. And death, as it often does to warriors, arrived when he wasn't holding a sword. It didn't come with cannons or steel. It came in the silence of a forest. On July 19, 1427, Stefan Lazarević was riding near the village of Glavica, hunting, taking one rare breath away from diplomacy. And then he slumped forward in his saddle. A stroke struck him down instantly. His entourage rushed to him, lifting the giant frame of their ruler onto the grass. He couldn't speak clearly. According to legend, His final garbled command wasn't a prayer, it was an order. Get Juraj. Even in death, his mind was fixed on the transfer of power. He died as he lived. Working. He was buried in Manasija, his white fortress monastery, the vault he built to preserve the Serbian soul. But the moment the stone was lowered onto his grave, the fragile peace he had constructed began to crack. Sigismund marched south to claim his payment. Belgrade's gates opened to Hungary. The Serbian flag came down. The Hungarian standard rose over the white city. It wouldn't return to Serbian hands for centuries. And to the south, the Ottomans smelled blood. They invaded. Golubac, reinforced by Stefan, was lost not through battle, but betrayal. The commander, Jeremiah, demanded a bribe to hand the keys to Juraj. When he didn't get it, he sold the fortress to the Turks. Within months of Stefan's death, the borders began shrinking. The darkness closed in. So how do we judge Stefan Lazarević? If you look at him through a purist lens, he's a problematic figure. He helped crush the crusade at Nicopolis. He served the Sultan. He saved the Ottoman Empire at its most vulnerable moment. A cynic would call him the ultimate collaborator. But history isn't written in black and white. It's written in shades of gray. And Stefan mastered the gray. He understood a truth we hate admitting. Sometimes martyrdom is selfish. Dying gloriously for a cause is easy. Living in humiliation to keep your people alive is hard. Stefan chose the hard path. He swallowed his pride. He rode with his father's killers. He bowed his head so his people wouldn't lose theirs. And what did that sacrifice buy? It bought Serbia 30 years of peace, a golden age of literature, art, and economic power. Time to build the Rasava school, preserving the Serbian language through centuries of Ottoman rule. He was a dragon in the truest sense of the order, a guardian. He guarded borders with his sword and guarded memory with his pen. The Serbian Orthodox Church later recognized that sacrifice, canonizing him as Saint Stefan the Tall, a fitting paradox, a saint who served a sultan. And his life forces us to face a question that still matters. What is the price of survival? When faced with overwhelming power, do you fight and die, leaving nothing but a romantic memory? Or do you adapt, compromise, endure, so there's still a future waiting for your children? Stefan Lazarević showed us a nation isn't just land. It isn't just a flag. It's a memory. And by building Manasija, by writing the word of love, he made sure Serbia's memory outlasted the empire that tried to erase it. The Ottomans are gone. The Austro-Hungarians are gone. But the words preserved by the Rasava school still exist. The dragon won the long game. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of the honorable traitor, the Knight of the Order of the Dragon, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We've got many more forgotten stories to unearth, and I want to hear from you down in the comments. Do you think Stefan was right to intervene at Nicopolis? Did he save his country or doom Europe? It's a debate that's lasted 600 years. Let's keep it going below.